Back when we lived in Fife, Mark and I were involved in a group who were considering the shape of the church locally as we moved ahead into a very different society from the one that much of what we now think of church was shaped for. All our thinking on that's been speeded up since the pandemic struck, but this was before that. And as we started out on our work and began to get down to detailed planning, we had an all-day meeting, and at the start, the joint conveners of the group invited those of us who possessed them to put our church keys into a bowl that was beneath a wooden cross. These are Invergowrie church keys. Always seem to be a remarkable amount of keys that a minister gets given. Put the keys below the cross. For those who didn't have keys to their own churches, then they could do the same mentally, emotionally. I am giving up my allegiance to my particular church, my congregation, and I'm doing so for the sake of Christ and the development of the kingdom of God in this place. Of course, it led to lots of jokes about then we could hand out the keys randomly at the end of the day, and you could end up in a quite different church from the one you normally were. And one person did forget to take their keys out of the bowl at the end of the day, whether deliberately or not, I've no idea. And someone else lent theirs to another person so that something different could be achieved. But that act of giving up our church keys wasn't just symbolic, it was very moving. Where do my loyalties lie? How much am I prepared to give up for the sake of the kingdom of God? How important is the building? Questions that again have come into sharp focus for all of us more recently. The local church, our own congregations. For the ministers among us, is where we were called. For the members, it's where they've chosen or where they grew up. For some people, it's the only church they've ever known. For others too, worshipping online now is different from that. And perhaps people are not tied to a particular building or congregation. So often when we speak of disciples, we think only of the fishermen and of leaving our nets to follow Jesus. But that's only one among many different ways of following Jesus. Jesus asked different things of different people. So today, we read of Legion, as the Bible version that we read calls them, or Mob, as some others do. I don't intend to use either name particularly today when talking about him, because neither Legion or Mob or whatever it was can have been his real name, but instead a nickname defined by his illness, and he left that behind. Was it a story you knew? For many, it's memorable because of the pigs, but actually they're hardly at the heart of the story. But often we think of this story as Jesus healing someone, which is right, but do we also think of it as a story of discipleship? When Jesus and his friends sail across the lake, they meet this poor, mentally ill man, ravaged by the forces that haunt him. Jesus heals him. As often, that's not the end of the story. What happens next is interesting. Whether it's because of what's happened to the pigs, or just general unease with Jesus, instead of being delighted that their local wild man has been healed, they're scared and they want Jesus to leave. The people clearly think his presence with them is disturbing, and Jesus is liable to stir up more trouble. Go away, please, they say. I think we are tempted to think that if only Jesus was bodily present here himself in our churches, then everyone would come flocking to him. I suggest that the reaction to ask Jesus to leave, whether from a church or a community, wasn't that unusual and wouldn't be here either. Go away from us. And Jesus goes. And of course, the man he's healed wants to go with him. Jesus has healed him, changed his life, given him a future, and all he wants to do is go with Jesus, to leave his nets, or in his case his chains, and follow Jesus. And Jesus says to him, no, go back home. Stay where you belong. And that's tough. That's quite possibly harder than leave your nets. Because although the fishermen were leaving everything behind, they were there with Jesus. They were in his presence from then on. But this man, in common with others elsewhere, is to stay by himself among people who've rejected Jesus. And he's to be a witness where he is. Why? Because he's the only one that people will listen to. They've been spooked by Jesus, and Jesus isn't welcome. But what Jesus did during the few hours that he was in that place will remain. Legion, I wonder if he kept the name, or went back to his original one, or even took on a new name to reflect who he was now. Whatever his name, this is the one person people might listen to. Might. There are no guarantees. But his changed life can't fail to make people take notice. And we know he also did what Jesus told him to do. He went all over the town telling people what Jesus had done for him. He wanted to go with Jesus, and Jesus said, no, go back home. Some are called to go off to new places, meet new people. Others are called to witness where they are, with the people they know. But what about when that changes again? Where's our loyalty then? Is it to the church, a particular church, in a particular place? Or is it to the kingdom? What are the chains that hold you that need to be broken? We had to give up our church keys to represent that our loyalty is to Christ, rather than to our church buildings and what they contain, or even our own congregations. And if the future of the church in our area here requires us all to leave behind some of what's dear to us, then we need to think about what it is that we're about. Go and make disciples, said Jesus. A few months ago, when we began here, I asked what your R number is as regarding making disciples, how much to pass on the faith. Jesus' own ways of making disciples were greatly varied. Not just leave your nets, not just go back home. All kinds of varieties in between, and we'll look at some more of them in the coming weeks. What's the best witness for the place that you are? What's the best way of witnessing for the person that you are? Who are the people around you going to listen to? And what can Jesus see in you that you may not even have recognised in yourself? These are, no doubt, some of the questions that influenced how Jesus called each disciple and how Jesus still calls each of us. Leave your nets, go back home. Listen to his voice saying, follow me. It might not take you where you expect or how you've planned, but it will be what's right for you and those around you.
All I once held dear, built my life upon, all this world reveres and wants to own. All I once thought gain, I have You're my all, you're the best. You're my joy, my righteousness, and I love you, Lord. Now my heart's desire is to know you more, to be found in you and known as yours, to possess by faith what I could not earn, all surpassing gift of righteousness. Knowing you, Jesus, knowing you, there is no greater thing. You're my all, you're the best. You're my joy, my righteousness, and I love you, Lord. Oh, to know the power of your risen life, and to